Good evening. Good evening. Hope everybody's having a good week. A little bit on the chat. If I could spell. So hope everybody's having a good week so far and had a great weekend. Finally got some stuff moving along in the shop. Tonight we're gonna discuss forward bite or squat or anti-squat, whatever you want to call it. But the way the rear suspension works, whether it's 3-link, 4-link, ladder bar, leaf spring, even IRS. So get started on that in about 10 minutes or so. Just want to kind of BS a little bit about what's been going on during the week. Saturday, I went over to Arcadia and worked on Leo's, so 4200 update. I got the ECU back in, fuel pumps working, all that was good. It would just seem to be a glitch in the firmware. And got the bump box working, so Billy can launch the car or stage the car properly now. First thing I did when I got over, Leo and I cut the oil filter apart, and the oil filter was spotless. So, knock on wood, that was a great thing. We haven't had such good luck with the engine in the past, so great to see that was clean. And ran the valves, everything was good there. Retorqued the head, and everything was good there. Hey Bill, how you doing? So I took the wastegate off and used a leak down tester and got the wastegate set up for 22 pounds, and was playing with his manual adjuster, so I got that kind of figured out where the adjustments will make boost, and put all that back together. And hey Ryan, glad you made it tonight. So put the car all back together, put it outside, and ran it up on the brake, and went straight to 12 pounds of boost. Oh, I forgot the caveat. I wrote a new tune for the engine. So in the Holley, all Holley systems, but Dominator especially because you have so many circuits in there, I was able to write a 2D table that changed the RPM limit. So we have a 2-step limiter that when the car's on the trans brake, it goes to 4200 or 4500 is where it's at now. And it seemed like it would get to 4500 pretty easily, and then start, knocking the cylinders off on the rev limiter like it's supposed to. But at that point, it wouldn't make much boost. And it seemed to me if I raised it up, the torque converter was too tight and it wouldn't allow the engine to get up there. But I figured that it starts banging cylinders, that's going to help spool the turbo even better. So with the analog tune that I already had wrote in there, I made this 2D table that actually every couple pounds of boost, it moved the RPM limiter up to a higher threshold. So gets the 2 pounds of boost, it goes to 4600. Makes another 2 pounds of boost, it goes to 4800. Makes a couple more pounds of boost, it goes to 5000. And it seemed to work because the thing went straight up on the 2-step and went straight to 12 pounds of boost. So fingers crossed, 2 weeks we're going to see this thing finally make a good lick. So it was a real good trip over there. Like I said, we went over everything on the car, so the car is ready to go. And as long as the tune that I wrote works like it did at the shop, we should be dialed in. Unfortunately, I never data logged it. I was so excited that it did that. We shut it off, let it cool off for a minute, and then put it right back on, and it did it again. And after I left, I'm like, oh wow, I didn't get a data log on it. Hey John, how you doing? So yes, that was the 4200 story for today. I think we are finally getting around the corner on getting the progress that we needed to get this thing back in the groove and making some real fast times. And if this all works and we can leave with 15 pounds of boost and we can run 24 to 26 pounds down track, I see no reason why this car is not going to break into the sevens. So that's kind of the 4200 update for today. Hey Chris, glad you're in. So another 6-cylinder I've been working on. My buddy Bert has a Gremlin that he purchased a few years ago that somebody made a homemade turbo kit, and unfortunately before I was able to help him with it, it already had knocked 2 pistons out of it. Now he's been driving it that way, just driving on 4 cylinders, not very far, but moving the car around and stuff. But we bought it has a 4.2 liter in it, so we bought a 4 liter because they have better cylinder heads on it, and it's taken a while to get all the parts and get all the pieces done and machined and all that, but I finished the engine yesterday, so that's going to be we'll be putting that video up on the channel maybe this weekend, and as soon as we get a break in the shop, I'll get the car down here and we'll get it in the car and make part 2 and get some dyno tuning and all that on it. So another 6-cylinder to look forward to. So a lot of little nuances in the AMC 6-cylinder that being that's not my normal engine to go over. It was a little bit of a learning curve, but one of those things, you take it apart, put it together, take it apart, put it together, get it all figured out, and I had to chase a couple little parts. We had some issues with some rings, DSS Racing pistons in the motor, and they took care of the ring situation, but that was ship the pistons back to them, ship them back to us. There was the 4 liter usually doesn't have a dowel pin in this block to cylinder, although there is a place for it. And looking at all the threads, I thought that maybe when we had to block the machine that they knocked the dowels out and didn't give them back to us, but it seems the consensus is the mid 90s 4 liters didn't come with them. They just used the head bolts to center, and the size of the head bolts, it actually, I checked, it actually does do a fairly good job, but I went ahead and made dowels, put them in there, got the head spot on, and then we found out there's a break in camshafts, and I had the wrong camshaft and timing chain for it. So we got that straightened out. Another little hiccup to tie the project up, but it's all done now, so we're all good. I'm kind of excited to see how that's gonna work out. That motor makes almost 10 pounds of boost on 4 cylinders, so it'll be interesting to see what the additional airflow, because that one does not have a wastegate. They use a fixed orifice on the turbine housing for boost control. So we'll see how high the boost goes, but it's got I put like I said, the DSS forged pistons in it, and scat rods, H-beam rods, and the cranks are pretty stout in those things. ARP bolts and Cometic gasket and stainless valves. So we have all the tricks in there, so it should be able to handle 15-16 pounds of boost, no problem at all. So that'll be something we'll be getting into in the future. Just about have Rihanna 2.0 finished up. Just have a couple little T's to cross and I's to dot, and put the hood and the scoop on it, and it's done. So that's another good thing, getting another project out of the shop. So excuse me. Sorry about that. But yeah, so we're making progress in the shop, making progress on moving vehicles around, getting that stuff done. And like I said, in the future we'll have a 4200 update on the on April 30th. That'll be the Tuesday after our next test session. So we'll be at Bradenton on the 28th. So look forward to giving you guys all the updates on all that stuff. So for anybody that's in the show tonight, watching the show tonight, we're going to talk about rear suspension geometry. this is kind of like a chassis dynamics thing I put together. Not a lot of thought put it together, but I'm kind of putting it together so we have some good discussion. So the first night, which was episode 39, we talked about alignments and what, the camber and the caster and toe out, toe in, all those kind of things. Where you want to be, what's the cause and the effects. And then last week we did front roll center, front geometry, and bump steer and Ackerman principle. So really good tying up the front suspension, between the alignment and then the engineering side of that. So tonight I thought we would go to the back of the car and we'll talk about forward bite, as they call it in stock car racing. Drag racing, it's either squat or anti-squat, but it's all different terms for the same thing. What the rear suspension is doing, and the goal is to get more suspension, get more traction. So, yeah, John, thanks. He says he's been looking forward to this. So let me switch screens here. So here's the Papa Smurf, and the car is launching, and on a radial tire you're going to want anti-squat, and you can see by the gap here in the wheel well that the suspension is forcing the tire into the ground, picking the back of the car up. It's the same way with a leaf spring car, whether you're running traction bars or you're running Calvert bars. They're all doing the same thing. They're picking the body up, pushing the rear tire into the ground. And so a big tire car, like this is the Pro Mod I used to drive, these cars do a little differently. They actually transfer the weight from the front tires to the back tires. The back of the car squats, and that's what gives you the traction. So different tires require different aspects of how you make contact with it. One thing with a slick, especially a bias ply slick compared to a radial, is bias ply slicks actually want slip. They want the tire to spin, a controlled amount of spin. But if you actually stick what they call stick a tire where it has zero slip, the tire will immediately go into tire shake. So you don't want that. And there's another chassis car I used to drive, and again this car had big tires on the back, so it was the car was looking for squat. So basically what you want to do, first thing you have to do is you want to put the car on scales, and you want to figure out how much weight is on all your tires. And then once you know the weight on each tire, then you can figure out the rear bias, left bias, right bias, and front bias. So one thing that a lot of people don't know is, first of all, let me say that you want your anti-roll bars disconnected whenever you scale a car, whether it's front and rear, front sway bar, front and rear sway bar, rear anti-roll, depending on what kind of action you do with your car and what you have on the suspension. That should not be equated when you're doing corner weights, because the anti-roll bar can put leverage or weight on each tire separately. So you want them disconnected, and that's something you do at the end. When you're scaling your car, obviously you want all of the weight in the car: driver, fuel, coolant, all the components you need in the car. That's, if it has body work that comes off or doors in it, all that needs to be on. The car needs to be basically the way it would be sitting on the starting line. And you want the ride height set right. So once you get those things done, you can go on the scales and you can adjust corner weights. So in this picture here, the left front is heavier than the right front, and the rear is even. On a drag car, that's basically how you're looking. You want it. Typically, you want the left rear. It's actually not even marked right. The right rear. Normally, you want about 15-20 pounds more weight on it than the left. And the reason being is the motion of torque from the engine through the transmission to the rear end is going to try to drive the right rear down. So you want a little bit more weight on that spring to keep the car more level. And then, of course, depending on if you're going straight or you're circle track racing or autocrossing, or road track racing, you'll adjust your corner weights accordingly. Now, a lot of these weights has a lot to do with where your components are in your car. So if you're trying to get your car completely balanced, then it requires moving components around. If you ever measured a stock vehicle, or a lot of times some racing vehicles, you'll notice that the engine and transmission are to the passenger side an inch or two. Now that's not, it could be to give the driver more legroom for the brakes and the gas and pedal and all that stuff. But typically that's to get the car more balanced when there's one person in the car. Again, you need to have all your components in the car. This is a drag car, but you want your ballast and your fuel cell, your battery, all those components in the car. And when you're assembling the car, thinking about where you want your weights to end up is going to contribute to where the pieces are. So fuel cell, battery, all those kind of things. If you have a dry sump oiling system, all those things can be positioned in the car to help your overall weight balance. So traditional drag car that wants squat, so it's got a bias radial, a bias ply slick on it, you typically need to put components in the back of the car and set the engine farther back to get more weight to the back wheels. A radial car, it's the opposite. You want all the weight on the front of the car. Autocross, road course car, circle track, you want more 50-50. So you have to think about that as you're putting the car together, of where you want to place these components. One is, where do you have room for it? And the other thing is, where is it going to keep the weight bias where you want it, so the car's easier to set up. Now here we're talking about cross weight. So cross weights are always the opposite corners of the car. So in drag racing, we typically use left front, right rear as our cross weight, where we want to set our weights. In circle track, it's the other way. It's right front, left rear. And then obviously in the road course type genres, you want that balance as close as possible. But drag racing, because the engine torque wants to pick up the left front tire and push the right rear tire into the ground, that's where you want your cross weights to keep the left front wheel farther on the ground. So in this particular instance, this car is not balanced very good, because it's got 659 pounds on the right front and only 610 pounds on the left front. It should be the opposite way around. Same with the rear. They should be within 20 pounds of each other, and the right rear should be the heavier one. So this car would need adjustments. Now, on a car that's got independent four-wheel suspension, so you got a straight axle with 4-link, a 3-link, IRS in the back, obviously IFS in the front, independent front suspension in the front. You can adjust. In a situation like this, you would turn the right front and the left rear spring perch down, and the right rear and the left front up the same amount of turns, and it'll change the corner weights, and it will keep the ride height equal. Now on a ladder bar car, and sometimes on leaf spring cars, the rear end, the suspension components like the ladder bars kind of work like an anti-roll bar. So when you do that, now you end up with preload in the anti-roll or in the ladder bar, and you have to adjust that out. So it's a little trickier to tune them. But a 4-link car, 3-link, or IRS car, you can make those adjustments, and the car will adjust, and you won't have to worry about resetting ride height. So when we talk about anti-squat and squat and all these things, we have to look at where, we have to figure out where it is, and this is basically the way we do it. So like I was saying last week, a quick, dirty way of doing center of gravity height is to use the approximate height of the center of the crank of the camshaft of the engine. In reality, I didn't print this slide, but the reality is you want to put scales on all 4 corners, weigh the car, then you want to jack up the back of the car a certain amount of inches. You use that in your formula, so we call that X. So jack it up 10 inches, and that would be your X thing. Put it back on the scales, and then you read the 4 corner scales again, and then you put those numbers into a math formula, which you can Google and find pretty easy, and that will tell you the real height of the center of gravity. Now, the center of gravity distance front to back, basically your weight of your rear wheels versus the front wheels divided by the wheelbase, and that will give you where you're going to be. If you got 50-50 and the car's 110-inch wheelbase, then the center of gravity would be 55 inches from the front and 55 inches from the back. Same as 60-40, it'd be the same thing. It'd be 40% from the rear tire and 60% of the wheelbase from the front tire if it's 60% on the front. Chris says, sent you a short video. Did you get it? Maybe too long to send. I don't believe I did get it, and my phone has been on the fritz the last 2 days. I tried to go get a new one today, and I didn't do it. So as of now, I have not seen it yet, Chris. So once you have your center of gravity, now remember the center of gravity is if you could take 2 pins and put that connected to the car at that point, you'd be able to pick it up and the car would be balanced front to back. So your 100% anti-squat line now we know where the center of gravity is. It is from the contact patch center line of the rear tire to the height of the center of gravity at the center line of the front tire. So whenever you plot your rear suspension, if it falls on this line, the car does nothing. It doesn't squat. It does not squat and doesn't anti-squat or extend. It would do nothing. It would just be neutral. So that's why it's important to plot your suspension so you can tell how you can gain forward bite. So what we do is we on the ground next to the car, you measure where your contact points are of your control arms, whatever type suspension you have, and then lay it on this ground here, and then you intersect the lines, and wherever that dot there, which is called the instant center, wherever that is, that's going to tell you what's going to happen. So on this car, it's actually on the 100% anti-squat, so it's not going to squat and it's not going to anti-squat. It's going to be neutral. Nothing's going to happen. And you can see the whole thing is we're trying to push the horsepower is pushing the car this way. You've got weight transfers and all that going into the equation, but you're trying to make this tire not spin. So that's why we do all this work to figure that out. So now here is a typical 4-link drag car. Do you weigh the car with the rear 10 inches higher than the front? Yes, Chris. So you have to first weigh the car on all 4 corners and record your weights. Then you pick up the car in the back a certain amount of inches. The higher up you go, the better, the more exact the program will work. And then you put it back on pads and read it again. And then you'd have to, I'll put the, I'll see if I can put the equation in the comments on the video, but it's not a very long equation, but it's a little daunting. So the cheater way to do it is center line of the camshaft and get you really close. So on this car, this would be like a car that would have a wrinkle wall slick. So you got horsepower going forward, and now you have horsepower going up and down because the body's going to move down, the suspension moves up by where this instant center is located. So if it was here, it would do less of suspension moving up, less body moving down, and there would be less loss of horsepower. And then farther out it goes is the other way around. The more squat, the more the suspension moves up, and the more loss in horsepower to move the car, but it creates traction. So you're trying to control horsepower to make the car have traction. So this way we're doing it by the weight of the car and by changing the instant center rather than actually taking power out of the car. So I looked for pictures. I didn't have one, but years ago I built a 40 Ford for a buddy of mine, and it had a 572 with a blower on it, street car, ran 990s. We're going back to 2006, 2007, and my buddy was at the time was an older guy, and we were kind of worried about how fast of a car he's driven and this that. I wanted to make sure the car would not spin the tires, because then the car could get out of control, especially with the torque of a blower. So we figured let's make this thing really have a lot of bite. We're gonna make it stick the tire, and it may slow the car down a little bit, but it'll be it'll be fun for him to drive. He's not looking for time slips. He doesn't care. So we did something similar to this, where we had the IC almost to the front tire, and with the torque of the engine, and of course the lower 4-link bar was close to the bottom hole, which was actually below the chassis. The torque of the engine actually bent the 4-link plates, and we had to put heavier. We had to double up the plates, and we had to put heavy wall 4-link bars in it. And you could actually see when we videoed the car that the car would actually squat, lift up the front end just a little bit, and then it would leave the starting line. So you had maybe it was just a couple frames in the video, but maybe a couple hundredths of a second, the car was actually reacting and not moving forward. So that's what they're talking about, loss of horsepower, because all the horsepower is being used to transfer the weight and to make traction, and then the car would leave off the starting line. So in a heads-up class, that would be a bad thing. In bracket racing, it's not a bad thing, because you can adjust where you leave on the tree so that all that body movement is happening before the green light comes on. So, it's not always a bad thing to lose a little horsepower to make traction. So that's what rear squat is. It's below the anti-squat line, so now it's squat. So anywhere this IC is, IC could be right here, it could be out here, it could be out here, it could be out here. It's still going to be squat. And obviously, the farther down and the farther forward, the more squat it's going to put in the chassis, the more movement the car is going to have for pushing the body down over the tire and pulling the suspension up into the body. I hope that you guys understood what I was saying there. So now this would be the exact opposite. So on the old super stock cars, the old Mopars, it would have, I don't know if any of you guys ever looked at the leaf springs on those cars, but they actually had like 9 leaves in the front of the rear end and only 3 leaves in the back of the rear end. So they were kind of using the leaf springs to keep the rear axle from wrapping the springs up. And then you got slapper bars, which hit the bolt on the leaf spring, which would be up in this area. So obviously that is anti-squat. And then you got the Calvert bars, which put a load on the leaf spring and make the car have separation, and make it have anti-squat. And of course, if you have a 4-link or 3-link car and you have the instant center above the 100% anti-squat line, you're going to have anti-squat. So this is typically what you want to do with your radial tire cars. Here, the torque of the motor is pushing the body up and pushing the rear end down into the track. And that's how it's creating traction. Remember, I was saying with the slicks, they actually want a little bit of slip to keep the tire from wadding up and going into tire shake. So that's why you want the body to move, the suspension to move up into the body and the body to come down over the rear end. That's to give it that little bit of traction slip where you won't even really see it. You can see it in an RPM drive shaft graph, but you won't really see it by eye unless you do a slow-mo on the slick. And that's if you guys didn't know, that's why people paint a stripe on the slick, is so that you can by camera catch what the tire is doing. But on the radial, you want to go up. So if you remembered our first picture, let me go back to that. Come on, there we go. So here you can see a Papa Smurf with a drag radial on it, and you can see the separation. Now, if I had a picture of the car sitting at rest, the top of the fender is only about a 1/2 inch above the beadlock. So that's how much separation the body is getting from the suspension. The suspension is forcing the tire into the track and picking the body up off of it, and that's how it's loading the tire to go down the track. And if we went to a slick car, of course I don't have a good side view, but here the rear end is coming down, the body is coming down, the housing is going up, and the car is moving forward, and the tire, it's hard to tell, but the tire is moving probably a lot faster there than what the car is moving. But that's all by design. That's how you make the car accelerate and move forward. This car would typically 60-foot 1 flat, so it does work. John says, best to have someone video you launch as often as possible. Yes. I typically video, and I've got hundreds of videos of cars going down the track, and I typically will video from the passenger rear wheel, and I get as close as I can to the rear tire, keeping the car in view. And once the car gets past the 330, I'll stand up and videotape it. But at that point, that's just to watch you go down the track. It's at the starting line. We want to mainly see the tire, and we want to see the wheel opening to the tire, and use that as a reference of how much squat or anti-squat we're getting. If you don't have a crew person that can do it, you can always you'll see a lot of teams will put a camera on a little handheld tripod that's maybe 6 inches tall, and they'll point the camera at the rear tire, so it will get probably the first 30-40 feet of the run, and they'll get it videotaped and then get somebody to pick it up. So definitely, if you don't have, you definitely need video if you don't have shock or ride height sensors, drive shaft sensors, and stuff like that. If you have the luxury of having 4 shock sensors and a ride height sensor and a dry shaft speed sensor, you can get a lot of idea. You can see a lot of that in your data log. So in your data log, especially with the slicks, we would break down the wheel speed. We would figure out in the data where the trans brake released, where the car began its movement, and then we would look at every quarter of a second. So 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 1.00. And at that point, we would pick the dry shaft RPM, and then we could plot how much spin we were getting by how much movement we were getting. So we would have a window, like on this car, we would have a window we'd want, boy, that's going back to 2005, 2006. But I believe we wanted 300 RPM at a quarter second, 700 RPM at half a second, and 1400 at 3/4 of a second, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what it was. So, and we within 50 RPMs plus or minus, and that was our target. And if the car went in the tire shake at say 1 second, and you looked at the dry shaft speed and they were low, well, that was telling us that the tire was trying to stick to the racetrack, which on a wrinkle wall tire, you can kind of see in that picture and in this picture, especially in this picture, you can see that tire wadding up pretty good. So let's see if I can make it any. I can't center it, but that tire's got quite a few wrinkles in it. That's why they call them wrinkle wall. So what will happen is if the tire tries to stick to the racetrack, the tire wrinkles on the rim even more, and at one point it will wrinkle so much that it can't wrinkle anymore, and then it will relax. And when it does that, the tires come off the ground and it starts doing tire shake. I'm sure you guys have all seen pictures of funny cars or dragsters on NHRA today when they do super slow-mo, and you can actually see the tire cupped with the center of the tire inward and the outer edges down, and the whole car having light underneath the ground. The car didn't hit something and jump off the ground. The tires were wadded up and pulled the body down so hard that when the tire relaxed or unwrinkled, it was like a spring, and it shot the car up in the air. And that can get really violent. You can break chassis parts. You can break chassis. In the fuel ranks, I mean, they have problems with people getting concussions and stuff from the car shaking so bad that their helmet is banging around in the cage. So not a good situation. It's not what you want. So that's basically where, what we want with a radial tire, or like I said, a leaf spring car. Now, if you're doing autocross or road racing or anything like that, this is still important because this is going to have a lot of bearing on what's going to happen when you get on the throttle coming out of a corner. So obviously, you don't want a real high instant center up here, and you don't want a real low squat number down here, because now the car is going to, every time you hit the throttle to leave the corner, the body is going to squat or extend, and it could throw the car out of control because you have other factors going on. You're not going in a perfect straight line. Drag racing, you're doing one thing so you can make it as perfect as you can. Going back to when we were discussing alignments and how in a stock car you could make the alignment so perfect for the racetrack because you could give up the straightaway because you wanted to fix the slowest part of the track. Now, when you're turning left and right in autocross or road course or any of that kind of thing, now you got to give up. You can't have it perfect for both disciplines. You got to either have it, good for straight line or good for cornering. So it's something you have to play around with. But again, knowing this information and plotting this, you'll be able to make adjustments and make heads or tails of what's going on, and you'll be able to know, am I going in the right direction or not? So that's this. Even though this is a lot with drag racing, it still pertains to all vehicles. This is all chassis dynamics. Everything has something to do with the other thing. You can't just align the car. You got to look at all these other things too. Same thing. You can't just come up with a front roll center and then not worry about the back. You got to do it all. It's all, and the guys that really pay attention and work and develop all your front anti-roll, your rear anti-roll, and then your squat and anti-squat, and then get your alignment so your tire temps are good, they're going to be the guys that are faster. I used to hear this when we were stock car racing all the time. A guy would come out with a new body. Oh, he's got an aerodynamic advantage. He's faster. Well, no, he was fast with his old car, and he works on his car a lot, and to the point where he even bought a new car. And of course, you're going to take all your information from your old one and put it in your new one. So that's why he's faster. It's because he's working at it. He's doing his due diligence to design a better mousetrap. So, I mean, that's the thing. If you want to just go out and race and you're happy with wherever you're at, then don't worry about it. You don't need to work on it. But if you want to beat the Joneses, you want to be as fast as everybody else, all these things are important. And this is really important in all disciplines, because most people think, forget about this, just put more horsepower in the car. But in actuality, putting more horsepower in the car and not having the chassis set up right actually makes the car harder to drive, not easier. I mean, yes, when you get the car finally in a straight line, you can apply as much power as you can, and it's going to be faster in that straight line. But it's easy to go fast on the easy parts of the track. To go fast, go faster, you need to fix the slow parts of the track. That is where all your times are going to be made up. In track events, again, road racing, autocross, stuff like that, driving lines have a lot to do with it. Braking zones have a lot to do with it. But if you can make the chassis work better, it makes all those other things easier to do. You're not having to drive around a problem. That was me with my 50 Chevy. If I drove it hard into the corner, which I had plenty of brakes, in fact, I had more brakes than I needed, then the car would push because the front suspension was never set up right. Now, that was on me for not fixing it, but, they always say the shoe cobblers kids go around with no shoes. I just didn't have time to work on my car. But customers that and friends that are into it, and I help them out. This is what we do. We go through all this stuff, and we make the car work as the best of our abilities, and then make all the other things go. Now, once that's all done, and you get the good driving line, and you get the good brake zone, and you can't make the car any faster, then by all means, put more horsepower to it. But you need to have the horse in front of the cart, not the cart in front of the horse. So here's how you figure this stuff out. And I didn't even think about this last week when we were talking about front roll center. This would be a perfect way of doing it. I never laid it out myself this way, but I get from Office Supply, Office Depot, or Staples, or wherever you get your supplies. They have these big books. I think they're 10 by 18 or something like that, but they're graph paper. And so what I do is I consider each one of those squares 1 square inch. So I draw my line near the bottom of the page, and that is ground zero. Then I take a straight edge underneath the car, which is a little cumbersome when it's on the ground, but you can put the car up on blocks. I have a set of wheel cribs from race ramps, but people make them out of 2x4s and all that stuff. Make 4 cribs, make them exactly the same height. Then you can put the car on that, and then you can measure your crib height and say, okay, the crib is 12 inches. So then all your measurements would be, you'd subtract 12, and then that would be your measurement to the ground. So this is a car I did a couple of years ago, and it was a 4-link car. So here's the holes on, there's the center line of the rear axle housing. You need to start there. And then I measured the diameter of the tire, and that's the diameter of the tire. And as you can see, it comes flat down here because when you have the weight of the car on the tire, the tire's flat on the bottom. So once you get the center line of the axle, and you know what the diameter of the tire is, then you can draw that line, and you'll know where all that goes. Then what I have to do is drop a plumb bob off of either the front or the back of the housing to the ground, and then I can measure from that plumb bob to each hole, front to back, and then that would tell me where to plot it, because I could measure the housing is a 3.5-inch housing, so that's 1.75 to my bob weight string. And then from there I could go back to each hole in the suspension, and then from the ground up to each hole, and I'd be able to transfer it to the graph paper and put everything where it needs to be. Same with the top holes. Then I come to the front of the car. Hi, honey. Hi. I do the same thing with the 4-link plates on the front of the car. And we measure from the center line of the housing to there, and that gives you your placement where those have to go. Excuse me. Now, on this car, I didn't do all the holes because it was probably 6 more holes this way. It was probably 2 more this way, 2 more this way. Same here and here. I didn't do them because I didn't think we needed to go in that direction. And you see I did some color lines. So here's my center line of my tire. Blue is my center of gravity. So there's our 100% anti-squat line. And then I started plotting different spots. So red was an original 4-link setting. Purple was a setting that I adjusted to. I didn't write it down in the notes, but there's also a blue line that was a new proposed setting. And out here you can barely see it, but there's a yellow dot out here, and those are the ICs, and you can see that these are all anti-squat numbers. But I'm only showing you a section of it. So what I actually did was I actually drew the entire suspension out. Got the wheelbase here. So you measure your wheelbase. If the car is a 105-inch wheelbase, well, then you measure, go out 105 or however it works out, and then your center line of your spindle, center line of camshaft, figure out the front to rear bias to get your center of gravity, and from that height and spindle center line to the back tire, now we have our squat line. Now, remember when I was talking about that blue 44 that I had done years ago? His bars were actually going downhill from the rear end, so it was probably up 1 or 2 holes, and at the very bottom on the 4-link, and the IC was out in this area somewhere. So that car had a lot of squat. So there is no right or wrong on doing this. It is what your car wants. So what you have to do is get the ride height set, get your corner weights so you know your front to rear bias so you can figure out where your center of gravity is. Then find whatever adjustments you have on your car, or whatever adjustments you're going to need. You can propose, say like you have a Fox body Mustang or a G or a body GM car. You don't have any adjustments here, but you can find out where the original hole is on the upper, the lower, and at the frame. and then you can still set this out and see where, if you have squat, if you have anti-squat, where the IC ends up, and then you can tell from there what you can do. Now, another caveat is if you change the ride height of the car. So say you pick up the back of the car by jacking up the suspension a half of an inch. Well, then all these holes have to be moved up a half of an inch, and you have to replot. But that's the convenient thing of doing it on paper like this. Or you can use a program, which I have. Let me see here. Performance Trends, they have a 4-link calculator. Okay, so this is a demo version, so you have to go through all that stuff. So they only give you one car to open. You got to use the Camaro file. Now this car was a 4-link car, but here's a prime example. Look at all these ICs out here. Here's your, hopefully you guys can see this with the colors, but this dotted line here is our 100% anti-squat line. And here's our CG, center of gravity. And all these points are where moving these bars around can make it. And notice there's one behind the rear end. You can actually end up with the IC behind the rear end housing. A lot of dirt stock cars will do it that way. So, but still the same thing is here. You still have to go underneath the car and get all your measurements to install this in the computer program. So you could use a computer program like this. Now this one will, if you change the ride height and stuff like that, it'll move these for you. So that may be a little easier. But going back to this is just only cost a couple, maybe $3 for a book, and you're good. You can lay it all out. So the big thing, I guess, the big takeaway here is get to work in your garage. Lay your car out. See where you're at now. Even if you don't make any adjustments or anything else, just make a baseline of where your car is now, and then go and test. Go to some events, whatever discipline you do with your car. Go do it. Take notes from your test session. You don't have to have a data logging system to do all this. You can take notes. Say, okay, at 2,000 RPM, I could launch the car from the stop, and it wouldn't spin the tire. At 3,000, it started spinning the tire. And then, did you feel the car squatting or jacking up in the back of the car? Write it down, and then go home, plot the suspension, and then you'll be able to see what it's doing when you look at it on paper, and then you can come up with some ideas. It may be just as simple as jacking the car up in the back or lowering the car in the back to change the bars in the position you want. Or if you have a factory 4-link or 3-link car, it may be as much as adding some plates to the differential to move the bar down, or to drill another hole in the frame to move the trailing arm up or down a half inch. All those things make big changes. You can see, if I go back one screen, this is 2 inches right here, and we have 3 holes, 2 holes within 1 inch of the chassis, and you can see it makes a pretty dramatic adjustment. So that's the beauty of this. You could lay this all out on paper and then make the adjustments on the paper and see if it's going to work or not. See what the outcome is going to be. If it's going to give you more, squat or more anti-squat. And then you can decide whether you want to go that direction, then go back to the track and test again and see what the gain or loss was. And that'll tell you if you're going in the right direction, it'll be better. If you go in the wrong direction, it'll be worse. And then you can start creating a logbook of which direction is the better way to go. And, you're developing your car. You're an engineer. So that's basically the rear suspension of the car. Now, like Chris's car, he's got that long trailing arm because it's kind of like I guess you have a 3-link in that. So if you have a fixed lower link, like a truck arm or a single one in the center, wherever that pivot point in the front of the car is, that's going to be your IC. Because the top bars are just basically centering the rear end in the frame because there's no pivot at the bottom. Your only pivot is right there. So that becomes your IC. If you've noticed any third and fourth gen Camaros and Firebirds at the racetrack, those cars had a torque arm in them. Same thing, wherever that torque arm mounted, that was the IC. So anybody that had one of those third or fourth gen Camaros, Firebirds, and put horsepower to them and didn't change the torque arm, you notice that they left the starting line with pretty big wheelies. And that is because, if we go back to this full page, their CG on a small block car would probably be about here. But that torque arm is going to be right at the tail shaft of the transmission. So it's going to be somewhere out like here. And so you can see that it is definitely a large amount of squat. And so what those cars do is the body comes down, the rear end goes up, and it pulls the front end off the ground, and they wheelie really, really hard. Now, if you go to an aftermarket company, BMR, Spone, there's a gazillion companies out there that make suspension points. Guess what? They put a short torque arm in it, and they move it back under the passenger seat. Gee, look what it does now. Now you're almost at the 100% anti-squat line. Now your body movement over top of the tire and the axle going up into the body is a lot less, and the car doesn't wheelie as much. So, prime example of, somebody did their engineering and they figured out, hey, if we move that back here, it's going to be better. And the same thing goes for, I didn't mention ladder bar cars. Ladder bar cars are the same way. There is no movement back here. There is only movement at the chassis at those 3 to 7 holes that you have on your chassis that the front of the ladder bar goes to. So depending on where those bars are and the length of your ladder bars, again, there is where your suspension movement is going to be. You can see 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. So a ladder bar car typically is going to be about 36 inches. So right about this line would be, let's go back to the close-up picture. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. So right about here is where your ladder bar car is going to be. Typically your ladder bars are 32 to 35 inches long, plus the Heim joint. So the bracket is about 36 inches forward of the axle. Or more, because actually they usually mount the ladder bar points on the housing ahead of the axle too, so it gets even longer. So you can see that if you're in the lower holes, the car is going to squat on the rear and leave. And if you use the top holes, it goes the opposite direction. It picks the back of the car up, drives the tire down. And if anybody is messing around with donks, and you sit back and you scratch your head, how are those cars leaving the line with sub 130 60 foot on a rubber band 26 or 30 inch tire? Those tires are cheap China tires Taiwan tires. They're not sticky at all. They're pretty hard, actually. How is that all working? Well, here's how. The car is jacked up. They usually jack the cars up because of the rim. The body of the car is moved up at least 5 to 10 inches. So if you look at those cars, the lower 4-link bar now is going in a direction to like up here. So they have a ton of anti-squat in the car. So once again, now you got a 4,500 pound car that is pushing the tire into the ground, trying to pick the body up. So what's it do? It makes good traction. John says, my problem is I need adjustable shocks. My front end comes up too fast and unloads the rear tire. So, yes, adjustable shocks will definitely help that. How much travel do you have in the front of your car? Because front end travel can be controlled, and that will help it out. So, typically on a car that likes to wheelie, we'll tie the front end down to about 2 inches of upward travel. You can use, companies make cables. I've had cables slip. I don't like them. But I've had, I like using chains with maybe a eye at the top with a couple inches of thread so you can make some adjustments. And what you do is measure the ground to the fender at rest, and then you jack the car up and you see where the tires start coming off the ground. And you'll see that a stock suspension car, whether it be AA arm or strut, will have about 6 inches of stock G body. Okay, so you're going to have about 5.5 inches. You're going to jack the car up, and it's going to jack up, and your tires are still going to be planted on the ground. And then you'll finally see the sidewall starting to come up off the tire. You stop there. Measure the car again, and you'll see how much forward movement you have. So the trick then is to make some type of device. There's plenty of companies that sell different setups. The really trick ones are the chromoly sleeve in a tube with a hitch pin, and it's got a long slot in there so the car can go up and down, but you pick the hole you want and it stops the up movement. Like I said, chain works well. You can weld a tab on the lower control arm by the ball joint, and then a tab on the frame near the upper control arm, and then run a piece of chain with like a long eye bolt, heavy duty one, like a 1/2 inch one. TIG weld the loop shut, and you can use one of the opening, one of the chain links that has the threaded piece in there to put it together. But that way you can then jack the car up to 2 inches and then tie it down so that that's as far as it's going to go, and then see how the car reacts, and then adjust from there. You can make it have, if it hits the tires and spins the tires immediately, but where before it was raising up before it would spin the tires, then you would give it more travel, but not all of the travel. But more than likely, you'll find that with about 2.5 to 1.5 inches, it'll control the front end. It'll keep it down, and it'll keep the car from getting too much roll and breaking the tires loose. And the reason it does that is when the suspension is moving, especially with a cheaper shock or a stock valve shock or something like that, even 9010s aren't really that great. It's allowing the front end to roll, and as the front end's rolling up, the car's going back onto the rear tires. So if you tie the front end down, now the body's going to start coming up as it did before, but once your limiter hits, it's going to stop the forward motion. Now the torque of the engine through the drivetrain has to pick up the front end off the ground. So that adds about, on a stock suspension car, you're probably adding about 275 pounds to the front of the car. So it's just the same as if you could magically add weight to the car when you wanted to the nose of the car. That's what we do on a drag car when it wants to wheelie. We add, depending on how bad it wants to wheelie, you add 10 pounds, 15 pounds. That's all it takes sometimes to stop the car from wheeling. So you're doing the same thing by putting the limiter. Once the limiter hits, you've just added a ton of weight to the nose of the car, and that will stop the front from coming up, and it'll plant the tires better. But now the other thing is, you still want to plot your rear suspension, because with a G body, you probably have anti-squat settings, so you may need to raise the car up, or the car may be too high already, and it's something you have to play with. But you'll have to plot it and then see where you're at, and then you can start making adjustments from there. There's a lot of companies that make lower controller mounts for those rear ends that have 4 to 5 holes in them, so you can get some adjustment out of it. And definitely the mounts on the frame in the front, you can definitely get at least one hole above and one hole below the stock hole to change your 4-link points. And then as you get more into it, there's quite a few companies make upper brackets where you take the upper mounts out of the body, out of the frame, and you put this roll bar piece in that welds in, and it gives you 6-7 holes for your upper link mounts on the frame side. So you can make the car really, really adjustable and still be stock suspension. So again, that's what we want to do. You want to plot the car so you can start making decisions on how to fix it. So I hope all this stuff made sense. If it didn't, send messages, leave messages in the comments. Reach out to me via email, whatever you want to do. We can go over some more of this next week if need be. Otherwise, next week we're going to talk about rear anti-roll. So it's not the forward, it's the side to side, and the correlation to the front anti-roll, how you balance the two. Now, in a drag car, has virtually zero adjustment. But wherever you have a diagonal link, or if you have a wishbone in your car, that is your roll point. So a high mounted, top mounted anti-roll bar, or not anti-roll bar, I'm sorry, wishbone versus a low mounted wishbone will change the way the car reacts. So all those things are, the way it's, the car's got the components in it. Now it's our task to make the car better by engineering what we have to work with, and what we can, where we can make our adjustments, see if they're good, and if we need more adjustments, then we can research that and figure out how to get more adjustments. So that's our front to rear suspension dynamics. I hope you guys enjoyed it. For people that maybe came in tonight for the first time, there's on the channel, this is episode 41. There's 40 other shows. The last 2 before this were specific for suspension, but there's we've had discussions in the past on braking, brake engineering, brake design, boosters, fuel systems. We've done EFI. We've done some wiring stuff. So I'm trying to go through all those titles and add like a glimpse of what that show was about, so you can pinpoint it, so you don't have to go through every one of them. But kind of would like if you went through every one of them. But no, really, I appreciate everybody coming on. Hit the like button if you don't mind. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Do all those good things. That all helps the channel. We're getting closer to our first paycheck. I haven't been notified as of yet, but slowly but surely we're working on that, and then we can get some more equipment, and I can get some more of these programs, computer programs and stuff, so we can do more of this stuff. and down the road, somebody has a car and, send me whatever information you have on it. If you make a plot or something like that, and we can go over it. We'll go over it on the show, and or if you don't want it published, if it's like a grudge car or something like that, you can hit me up on my email, and we can keep it private to the side. But anyway, just whatever works. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Let's see. John says, thank you very much. Bill says, thanks, George. We learned something today. Chris says, I run both fuel lines, entering the back of the fuel rails, coming up the front. Does it matter which way fuel enters in the rails? No, because your regulator is going to be on the opposite end, and the regulator is going to balance all that out. So that does not matter. Some sanctioning bodies, I know in drag racing, you're not supposed to have any fuel around the flywheel area of the car, but in an EFI car, you really can't get around it, and even the production cars have it, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. So yeah, I don't think that matters at all. Maybe in a really high acceleration car pulls a lot of G's of acceleration, maybe going through the front would be more advantageous, especially on something that would have large injectors, because it may be, pulling all the fuel out of the, if it's pushing from the back to the front, you got the G load of the car pushing the fuel back to the back. So that could maybe, but not on a car like yours, Chris. You're going to be fine. I've run them either way. Just depends on which way the plumbing is easier. So don't worry about that at all. It'll work perfect. Quite a few cars we have, the regulators is mounted between the rails right above the thermostat housing. So easy peasy. So anybody else has any questions? I think we'll go ahead and pull the plug for tonight. I appreciate everybody coming on, and look forward to next Tuesday. We'll get into the rear suspension for that, and the correlation to the front, and we'll go from there. And give you updates on what's going on in the shop, and we'll be a week away from our test session next week. So hopefully that's going to come out good with Leo and the 4200. Really hoping that we can finally get the demons exercised, or whatever that's called, removed from the vehicle. We've had nothing but issues with that car for the last 3 years. So hopefully we're finally getting all those things wrapped up. And like I said at the beginning of the show, when I left his place on Saturday, if we were at the racetrack, I see no reason why the car wouldn't have ran a low 8-second pass just right off the trailer. So hopefully that all works as planned at the racetrack, and we'll have on the 30th, we'll have some big news hopefully. So with that, I don't see any new questions, so I think we'll call it a night. Thank you to everybody that came on the show. Thank you for everybody that was on the chat. And with that, I'll see you guys next week. Thanks. See ya. Oh, where's the music? Cue the music.